who will lead us to why we're here. Thank you. Has he paid you extra money?
Now, you guys will stop behaving like area boys. What is all that? That's no longer clapping. That's protest action. Let me read an excerpt from the one that the revolutionary one that I ensured that Dagatola didn't read, because if he had read Ndugi, you would be more less popular, because everybody knows about Anke Crop. Long from page 124 of Nokoma Wangoge's We Discard. Now, does anybody know Ngoge wa Fiongo? Okay. And you know that he had a son. This is his son. So it's like another Achebe kind of writing. So just imagine a Chinelo Achebe being the writer. Chinelo Achebe is the writer, right? March 11th, why do we come here? I woke up with the question of why we come here ringing in my head. We left because we would have been disappeared. But why didn't I, for example, go to Zimbabwe or Cuba? I could have taught literature there at the high school. Why the United States? Why the belly of this fucking whale that will not spit me out? The doctor from Haiti, but for his conscience, could have thrived alongside Papa Doc. Papa Doc was a dictator so vicious that even in my country, we were scared of him. I like to joke. Why do we come here? I know why I left. The answer is simple, but I do not know why I came here and now I am returning. Or perhaps I chose not to know. But I do know that the movement does not complain about the dollars. But I do know that the movement does not complain about the dollars I and others like me send. They are able to do more with the US dollar than a Zimbabwean RTGS. The movement sent me here for the dollar. Perhaps I was following the glossy advertisement of the supersized America that covered the walls of Sukena's home. Mokoma Wangoge, we discuss. You should find out in the course of this conversation why he's different from his father. So let me just invite the panelists, the distinguished ones. The moderator first, Mr. Tade Badiola, who won, in my own view, okay, there's no other, so that anything I say is his own award for me is the most intelligent work that any of those awards have been. Is Sahara Testament. I'm in my, this is, for example, this is your Aburo who won the Kane Prize. In my view, that was the best Kane Prize. What's his name? Wrote him in here. So I have my own choice of, who, that Kane Prize, that short story. B. Bandel, someone also wrote for them. Let's leave it at that. Let's not dwell into it. So I'm going to invite him up here, and then you all know Dagatola, the man who runs the AJ House of Poetry. Look who's here! That's what they call a late Donla. So Dagatola, the poet, will join him. Come now, Tade, yes. So Tade was you can choose any seat. You can be the extreme. You can be in the middle. So Tade was the 2013 Nigerian Prize for Literature Award winner, and so he also collected $100,000 at some point. And so you can see all that linear, and A.J. Dagatola is revolutionary poet. He's the author of This Country Is Not a Poem. Thank you very much, sir. So it's a star-studded panel, and Precious Nziako is the winner, the 2024 winner of the Kensara Prize for Book Reviews. Come on, sir. She will be discussing this text. So that's, sorry. I have Funke. You see, I'm now doing exactly this. I have Funke Awodia, all the way from Ado Ekiti, no, but I'm trying to Afe Babalola University. I've been engaging with her, and you know how they come. So you're going to listen to her this afternoon. When I mentioned, I didn't know that she was a star. Also, that the name came to me from Tade Padiola, and it was when when German saw her name in the program that he started describing, German knows everything. He was saying, okay, the blah, 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 reactor, the blah, blah, all of that. I said, I didn't know. No wonder she will get to me and say, but you haven't done this. But I didn't know I was dealing with. So Funke, you're welcome. All right, so that's the panel. Funke has read Anke Krog. Precious is dealing with Mr. Ngugi. Dagatola is dealing with Anke Krog. Anke Krog is so big that you need more than one person to handle that book. So that's why you we discard. We discard. We have card. We discard. All right. So that's it. You have your 1.5 hours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It's always a pleasure to be here to look at books and authors and the continent and our world. The colloquium is a chance we have every year to look at topical works which help us, put a lens on who we are, how we are doing. And I have with me a distinguished panel, as have been introduced. I have absolute confidence that by the time our 1.5 hours allocated to us is done, the audience would have a good grasp of what we are about. So this afternoon, we are looking at these books with an eye on redress. How do we effect redress? I had to read both books, and I could see, even though they are two different genres, Mukoma Wanguge's book is a novel, but Anke Krog's book is difficult to classify. It's faction with more fact than fiction. It is a memoir, but something a little bit more than a memoir, because Anke is actually primarily a poet. And it shows, as the panel would disclose. So you have, in these two books, certain commonalities. You have the subject of trauma. You have a preoccupation with truth. What is the truth? Should we tell it? How much of it should we tell? How much of it can we safely process at this time? And really, what kind of handle do we need to get as a continent? Because these are questions we cannot run away from. I think the book, as a knowledge-bearing object, does something that the judicial structures we have cannot do. They enable us to revisit and revisit again certain things so that we can, over time, process it more efficiently and work it into our psyches and the society more effectively. But don't let me take all the time, because if you give me all the time, I will take the 1.5 hours. I will start. Don't say I'm partial. I will start from my left. Dagatola is a poet, and he has read. And I saw a copy of his book. He has marked it with different kinds of markers, just like I did, Dagatola.
Well, I think one of the beautiful things is that, though unconsciously, I'm sitting on the left-hand side, and for me, that would be the first take for me on this text. Because who or what is South Africa? It is the oldest run imperial capitalist economy on the African continent. And to have somebody examine that for us within the context of the lives of not just the blacks, but even the Afrikaners, the Boers, who have been the highest inheritors of that slave capitalist apartheid system up to 1994, pictures put before the whole of the African continent what is possible and what will never be possible on the basis of a private-run economy. We might think this is not clear in this text. For me, it comes out very, very clear. But that is not the story of this book. I read this book and I asked myself, where is this example in the Nigerian society? And yet this country in the 80s, in the 90s, produced very beautiful, fantastic journalists. Because we must speak the truth to ourselves. Where do we put our hearts? Because what a journalist does is that it offers you the opportunity to be a direct witness of history. So we meet with somebody who employs the entirety of that art to deliver a text to us. And this text cuts through generations. Takes us to the coming of Jan Vereebak in the 16th century into South Africa. Why, and don't forget too, who are they? How, coming from the Dutch East Indian Company, and the particular beautiful geographical location of the Cape Coast and the role it played in the mercantile, not yet emerging capitalist system in the old world at that material moment in time. Again, too, it's also a book of historical displacement, because as a student of history myself, what is completely lost in the study of African history is the whole struggle of the Boers against British colonialism. That particularly struck me, because as historians, we yet have not reconciled that these categories of human beings are on the African continent. And indeed, they led a fierce struggle against British colonialism. They not just led a fierce struggle against it. British colonialism was defeated. No matter how you want to categorize it, because it was that defeat that led to the birth of apartheid states in 1910 onwards, to now have a state. But I'm being too political in terms of the text, because what is South Africa today? Let me take that. And 2024, the ANC lost its majority in power. Extremely significant. But even how that has been managed within the political configuration of the various political parties, Zuma, MK, the EFF Malema, Julius Malema party, losing even some of his seats in parliament, again, too, is another story on the side. But the main thrust of this story is to say that what has happened to South Africa since 1994, how have the various social classes reacted to what is referred to as change? The title is titled a change of tongue. So what has happened through all of this period? And what she does is that she takes a journey around all this, back to her birthplace. She meets with friends, she meets with schoolmates, she examines their new social position and provides us what they think about the current situation, using their examples, using their lives, as example. For some people, yes, change has taken place, but in dissecting change, she informs us that no transformation has actually taken place fully in South Africa. And like I said, I find it very difficult to read the material a second time. Yeah, because I live in a continuous world of books coming upon you day in, day out. But this is a book to read a second time because there are a dozen things to pick from it. If you are a poet and you are battling with how do you transit from poetry, to prose, she delivers the concrete example of how to go about it. Begin to conduct interviews with people.
In fact, I know if I leave you to. So let me say something that Mr. Kiosho instigated. So when I was told that this is one of the books, but that it will take some time before the copies arrive from South Africa, I went on Kindle and got myself a copy. But it's electronic. One of the things, it's surreal actually. One of the things that happens when you're reading electronic books is that you tend to unconsciously skip the introductory portions and you go straight to the text. So I was reading the book and Mr. Akinosho was following up to say, so how far along are you? And I said, well, that novel is a very strange novel. And he said, no, it's not a novel. Because it initially read like a novel. So I saw what he meant when I got the physical hard copy. And I saw, no, it's not a novel. It's actually a memoir. It's a memoir. It's something extra. But my point is that just like Dagatola has told us, this is a book that actually invites a rereading of not just the entire book, specific chapters, because it tells stories that journalists don't normally tell. In fact, she had to go against some of our editors in order to make some of these stories available to us. But so that Ange will not take all the air in the room, we come to Mukoma Wangugi, who, is a very interesting writer in his own right. But for various other reasons that are not necessarily literary, became famous around the continent a short while back. But I was reading this book and I came to the conclusion that there are things for us to learn. The question of truth in society, the question of justice, the question of reparations, the question of reconciliation. How well are we doing? Ange also treats those topics, but Mukoma does in a very, very interesting way. Precious, do you have something you want to read to us from the book that struck you particularly? Or do you want to address your impressions of the book generally first? You can do both. Thank you.
So yeah, permit me to read something I wrote in my review. The last paragraph. The conversations in this book are deep and require time to digest and assimilate. No part of this book is for entertainment, as you would expect a book of fiction. Mukoma was on a mission to share, expose, and solidify the information that he has wielded about the parts of history that has been omitted from the books to suit a narrative more conforming and patronizing. Lives were lost in the fight for freedom. Many lives were affected in the process. Through this book, many lives and sacrifices will be remembered, etched in the sands of time forever. So yeah, when I got this book, obviously it's not something I'm used to, I would say, because as I've mentioned, reading for me is like a soft landing. So I like to happy endings, maybe love stories, something I can finish quickly. When I started this book and I realized that there was much more to it, and I said at some point in my review as well that Mukoma, I would say, was the best person to tell this story. You've probably read of books like this where an author is trying to tell history of a people, what happened during the time of war or the insurgents, or fight for justice, and it's always from a second person narrative. Let's take Chimamanda for example. When she wrote her Revolution, she said she was too young to remember much of what happened during that time, so she had to consult her father, uncles, much older people that experienced the war more than she did. But I would say Mukoma is, the perfect person to have written the history as he did, because he has a first-hand experience with it. His father was once an exile and had once gone on exile, and I feel like there's like a similarity, sort of a parallel between his dad and our main character in this book. And then he goes on to, I would go on to say that he explores a lot of, as much as he was trying to tell us much about the truth of the people. Like I said, it's a book of fiction, but you would see a lot of parallels between the book and the people of Kenya during their second revolution from colonialism. So they were calling it the post-colonial period, where even after Kenyans had been liberated from the British, they still had to fight amongst themselves, amongst leaders that were hoping to reserve the resources for themselves, selfish gains. And then there was a second rise, people that couldn't tolerate the injustice and were being called the this practice, this fight that they had to go through. We were able to see the effects on both the people, the exiles, how did they handle the situation, the people that were left back at home, the way they were trying to, rebarrel, trying to sort of down the effects of what they were going through. So yeah, Mukoma, in this book, he's trying to tell us that there are parts of our history that we don't know about, and a lot of people have written history in such a way that it suits them, whether with the truths or lies, in such a way that it suits them, and is conforming almost, it didn't really happen like this, so this is what happened. But no, Mukoma is like, this is exactly what happened. Lives were lost, and he wanted to tell us that story from his point of view.
Thank you very much. A round of applause for her. Why is there so much feedback? This is not the kind of feedback I was looking for. No, I meant the electronic feedback. I agree with you entirely that Mukoma Wangugi is the perfect author to write this thing, because he is actually in the mix. He's not talking from outside of experience. I was in Kenya in 1999, and the first thing I noticed was that on every unit of currency in Kenya, everyone, including the coins, the face of only one man appeared, Daniel Arap Moi. Now, do you now blame the man from Europe somewhere who sailed and then colonized for that one? He's one of us. But he just totally, the airport, as you are arriving in Kenya, the airport that you land in is named after, everything was named after this man. It's one of the things that Mukoma writes about in discussing the scars that the continent has gathered over the years, over the decades. came close, I think, to experiencing something like that in Nigeria when one of our mad tyrants decided that there was going to be a 1 million man march. There was going to be oh, yeah, five fingers of a leprous hand, and he decided that when you are coming to council meeting, you will have a picture of himself. Because you see, it's easy. If you did not have that picture of Abacha on your jacket or Babariga, that means you're automatically a rebel. And they knew, we all know what happened. So the thing about, I'm going to come back to you because I want you to also tell us something about how Mukoma tries to draw in the rest of Africa into his narrative, not just Kenya now. I know that he named certain characters from Nigeria, certain characters from Ghana, certain characters from South Africa, certain characters. The only place he left out, in my opinion, was North Africa. But yeah, so I have to say that unlike Mukoma Wangugi, whose father is a world-renowned author, actually, Ange Krog is also a child of an author. But, you know, something happens I don't know whether you saw it. Something happens when either your father or your mother is a writer and you are also a writer. There is this undeclared war about who is going to be the more famous author in the long run. And it was one of the things that, drew my attention. But before we go into all that, there is a particular encounter in the book that struck me. Mandela came out of prison, and in one of the organized press conference interviews, she was told, the author was told, that Mandela requested to have her on the panel of journalists that were going to interview her, and something happened. Yes, please, please tell us what your impression was of that particular encounter. Thank you very much. Now, I cannot help but say this. I'm my grandmother's son. And I have learned that there are things that women say that if you're a man, that, but you will never and get done, which is exactly what my grandmother has done. I was there, even though my grandmother has never been to a formal school for that has this, however you want to characterize it, interaction with each other. Behind the scenes, to see where Mandela stood in the traditional power structure of his community in South Africa. I don't know where women land that thing, but I think it has to do with a more thorough understanding of power than men size each other up. That's why the man would scrape down the back within that traditional power structure. She actually introduced the tensions between Mandela and his cousin, who would have easily emerged. I will come back to my own presence. Liking us about something that I earlier. She wanted that happy ending. And this book does not offer that happy ending. However, I believe that move forward. I suppose I don't think that Okuma just engaged the question of truth and what should be revealed as an exercise of imagination. I think he was actually personally struggling with the question of what about my society? How much of it should I do? Do you think it is useful for us as a people to go into this question of what really happened? Because I am also conscious of the untruths and the misdirection that have been enforced and taught in schools as truth. For example, in the book we saw the skull that was brought back from exile, back represented as the skull of one of the ancestors of people, whereas it is actually the skull of one of the colonizers. I mean, you don't tell one skull of a black man and white man apart because it's completely behind. But Okuma tries to play around with this subject of how much is safe for us to consume. And we could tell the people, do you think there is something that can help us in our quest sincere. Certain way in which the hard left went about the campaign for Kamala and themselves, that I believe alienated a huge portion of the American population. They have a problem in the sense that what has emerged is that Trump actually represents the majority opinion, whether people like it or not. I don't like what Trump represents, but it seems that the American population prefer it that way. But I also believe that the failure to manage what people know about themselves as a society is one of the reasons why it was possible for somebody like that to emerge. I know that that guy is itching to talk about, because again, I'm coming back to you, but I believe that there are things that Ange Krog would be reluctant to say as a white person regarding us as Africa. How much of these things do you think happened? How much of the management of the truth about us do you think Ange did in that book?
I think one of the things she succeeded in doing is taking the decision that she will now write in English. Because there is also the need to build a bridge to be seen as part of those people you want to begin to represent appropriately. And what she skillfully does is that as somebody who is inside, she sees the reaction of her own people. First, as a poet, the hunger, not because she was a poet, the subject of her poetry, the hunger, it builds. In fact, she came and told her mother that I'm not going to school. And the mother said, shame in Mobile. You know, you can imagine that type of reaction. You know, and the mother, you know, makes it quite clear that you can't write anything if you are not reading, if you are not educated, and all of the rest. And that if she has to take a police officer to take her to school every day, that she was going to do that. But the point we are saying is that the text begins with an entire spot. Very, very subtle, and she brings you to begin to see how you can begin to appropriate as many materials as possible to write. She visits a school, an entire sport is just taking place, and she just asks a question: why is everybody happy? You know, and there is a reason for all of the different categories of people to be what? To be happy. For the first time, you know, black parents are in a school that is usually reserved, you know, for what? For whites. For the first time, you know, black children can run, you know, and test their strength and skill, you know, and win. You can even celebrate that. Even the series of rebellion by the white teachers who left the school, you know, initially because black children are taking over, you know, as students in school, you know, you had some few teachers who were celebrating because they were the ones who trained those black children, you know, for the entire school. So, not be a sectarian, because it would be sectarian to say that apartheid has actually brought about anything, has not brought about any level of change, you know, appropriately. But what she questions is the depth of that change, the quality of that change. She recognizes that, you know, and you could see the differences. But there's one crucial incident, shocking, you know, which brings Nigeria, you know, back alive. You know, the telephones are not working, and and somebody comes and tell you that I will offer you a whole cow, you know, a whole bunch of meat to have you restore my lines. You call, nobody is going to answer. But the moment you're offering that, somebody is sent in immediately, and the lines are what are restored. And for me, like I've said, there is an attempt of the wise to say that, well, the conditions in South Africa today is because, the blacks have taken over, and as usual, blacks will mess up anything, they take over. And for a majority of the blacks, there are those who say that Mandela was not decisive enough, that the series of the necessary fundamental changes, did not come about. That is why, even though we seem to have the power, there is a text there which I underlined, where he pointed out that the necessary fundamental changes have not occurred. The Boers, the white, still maintain all of the key, most important sectors of what what Franz Fanon will refer to as that, you now have black faces, you now have a black mask, but the white face, continues to dominate the whole stage of political power. And which takes me back to my first, of course, there are little subtle themes which are essential for writers. There's these 2-3 pages which I have to outline everything about translation.
Yes.
The difficulty.
Yes.
In rewriting a text in another language. And she had to confront that, because following the first encounter with Mandela, this is somebody you had worshipped all your life. You felt that as somebody who had to break your own social class to embrace the ideas that somebody like Mandela represented. You are meeting Mandela for the first time, and there is the one-off answered question collective. Of course, Mandela strikes the appropriate point. You cannot personalize issues, of political, that will have effects on all of us. That there's no way you can. So this attempt to say that Mandela, how do you feel? I can't feel anything. It's the ANC, it's the party's program for what? For change. But that's not where we are aiming to. Mandela finally mentions that she should be invited as one possible person that can handle the translation of a long walk to freedom. And what this means is that Mandela's first encounter with her, he doesn't take it there was nothing personal about how he reacted to her. Because if Mandela himself can recognize that, yes, I met with this lady and I think, she might be one of the best person that can translate this text. But what I enjoy most in those 3-4 pages of translation, I want to even say that we should challenge ourselves to take that aspect out as an excerpt.
An excerpt.
Yes, because it's profound.
You actually may get as much out of one MFA year of translation,
yes,
paying $14,000, $40,000 to learn. She is a master. I'm sorry, but I have to butt in at this point. There is something that Ange Krog as a writer does brilliantly. For example, she pits the attitude people have towards Mandela against the attitude certain leaders in Africa like Bob Mugabe and Laurent Kabila had. It will rain today because we have Jankon. Now, what she does, in my view, is very, very interesting, because she doesn't quite say that your problem is not the white man. No. She only needed to say that see Laurent Kabila, see Robert Mugabe, they are not white, without saying it in so many words. But if you want to go and live in Congo, go ahead. Make yourself happy, knock yourself out. If you want to go and live in Zimbabwe, make yourself happy. The second thing that she does is very scatological. She starts not with others, she starts with herself. She takes this subject of human waste, her own waste, and how it is treated, very serious. I no longer engage on social media as I used to, but I am aware that in the last 2 weeks or so, there was this massive row on Twitter about Lagos is smelling. No, you can't say Lagos is smelling. But Lagos is smelling now. I can say it because I don't live here. I can say it as somebody who, when you drive into Lagos, you are assailed by this stench. Because we do not have waste treatment plants that are 21st century compatible. But I want you to finish your train of thought. Oh yes. Which, I'm sorry to say, the first time I heard that Lekki is a ghetto was not in Nigeria. It was in Soweto. A man called Musa, a white Zulu South African who had been to Nigeria before, said, in Soweto, it's not in Santino, in Soweto. Soweto is like Ajegunle. So imagine somebody in Ajegunle saying, Lekki, we have work to do. Yeah.
A huge work. Let me read that. Translation creates space in a language. It lets the osmosis of human knowledge take place between culture. Translation is like gymnastics for one language, an exercise in language that only makes literature accessible, but ensures that all kinds of concepts are brought in for which you have to discover equivalents. To me, translation seems essential for the depth and subtleness of language. Take the word forefather, or will you use the word ancestor? Does it carry the same content? A foreign culture can only be perceived by means of comparison with one's own culture. The culture of primary enculturation. There can be no neutral standpoint from comparison. Now, when she takes on this concept of culture, you mentioned the word Zulu here now. She returns Mandela back to his homeland. And there is a conflict of who is Mandela within the traditional political setting. You know, he has a cousin who is the king, who Mandela is expected to pay homage to. You know, and there is the king too, who feels the need, because Mandela, who is junior to him in terms of the traditional political system, you know, is now president, and he must not be seen humiliating Mandela to also pay homage, you know, to Mandela. So the king or the chieftain, you know, doesn't make an appearance on the public space. But this place is particularly exciting for me, and it should be for all of us as Africans, because we have not yet made peace to consign our political traditional institutions to the dustbin of history. We still have this false nostalgia about chieftaincy and kings, when in reality they are a privileged class of people practically performing no role in society. Of course, the French Revolution resolved that, you know, for Europe. It is important because the question of equality, and there's a sense in which the author addresses it in the conflict. Of course, they say that, well, this is why Africa cannot be, communism cannot work in Africa, and hides it under that framework. But the point to make is that your traditional institutions are political authority. And before the emergence of colonialism, they were a caste of privileged few that sold us, that did not appropriate enough resources for development to commence, and colonialism trampled them. In British colonial systems, they maintained them and used them as instruments, you know, to perpetuate colonialism. So when I see somebody says he's a chief, and of course, today's pays wages to them and uses them as instruments to endorse whatever they do or what they do not do. It doesn't address this issue fundamentally, but it raises it in a way, and like you have pointed out, she tries not to be, even when she wants to push that point, she tries not to push it so that you now accuse her that she's the one saying.
If you're black, you are allowed to say you're nigger. But if you're white, you're not allowed to use the N-word. So I understand that.
But she brings this out more clearly when she points out the role, you know, the Inkati party in Zulu plays, in alliance, with the whites, and yeah, Buthelezi, and points it out that in reality, that these political structures cannot be the way forward to define the future for the
That is
African
one
continent.
instance. The other instance is when she juxtaposed the mass murder of that
War with Rwanda.
No, the mass murder of the church people in Mpumalanga, 2,000 were massacred. But she immediately goes to the mass murder of Boers by British people, 200,000. Which is to say that you are not the only people suffering here. We too, we bled and we died. But I know that if I allow you, you will take all the time. I requested for 10 extra minutes from Mr. Kyosho, but so that we can use it judiciously, I have to come back to this side. Now, Precious, do you think that Africa needs to make specific provisions? Because we are actually talking about redress now. Do you think Africa needs to make specific provision for the reception and, how would I call it now? For the reintroduction of Africa's exiles, the diaspora, back into Africa? Do you think we really need to consciously, as a continent, make a plan for that?
Of course, I agree, not just for us as a nation, but also for them. We see a point where the protagonist, he is abroad, and then he's questioning his life, what am I even doing here? Okay, the part of the excerpt that she read, what am I doing here? What life am I living? He's left his loved ones at home. He's dealing with PTSD. He's feeling worthless. He's in a foreign man's land, and he doesn't know how to navigate his life after leaving, a home that he knows, people that loves him. So yeah, it's good for them. But then at the same time, he had a story to tell that he needed to bring back to his people. So I do agree that it's important to welcome back exiles, like you said, people in diaspora, because they have a story to tell that we need to hear. And also it's important for them to be reincorporated back into their own land, to return to their people and to heal, to learn to start to heal from the trauma that they've been through.
Yes, because in the book, if you read the book, the women they went the extra mile to receive the diaspora, the exile, back into society. But it was the men, or at least one man, who made sure that the returnee was executed. So I think Africa has that problem particularly, and we really need to address it, because we are scattered all over the globe. Some of our best are abroad, and we really need to get things going on the continent. I believe that Nigeria has the capacity to become a power, if not a superpower. But when your best scientists, your best engineers, your best finance people are abroad, there's a problem. Now, before we throw the microphone to the audience, I have this image in my mind, and this is how Angie Krog ends this book, A Change of Tongue. The death of the father and the burial of the father. It is so symbolic. Very symbolic. They decided that he was going to be buried on the farm. When they started digging, they struck rock, and they had to break the rock in order to find enough depth in order to bury the old man. And it came to me that how much more do we who were born here, how much more do we need to express our love for this land? every page of this book, to me, is an indictment of us who were born here, who are black skin. Do we express as much love for this land as these Africans who, you know, willingly want to identify as Africans?
Well, one of the major themes of this book is identity. And she was able to address the issue of identity from the perspective of someone who is identifying as an African, but remembering that you can't be more African than the black African. And that subjectiveness in the text make me feel like she's in a very difficult situation. And talking about the imagery, the mental picture, the death of their father painted, and the way she described where she was born when she has to go with the television crew, the kind of images she wanted to project, is just, I'm just seeing myself like, I grew up in a place that is not considered to be Lagos enough. That's Alagbado. And I know how I feel about that part of Lagos, how I want people to know about what is happening or what has happened in that part of Lagos, because that's my identity. That's the Lagos that I know, even if I visit Lekki or anywhere. So I can see that despite the fact that she's not trying to say I can be more African, she's telling us something which I will call the landscape of meaning. Everything she has written, her experiences, even if it takes breaking the rock for us to accept that we don't have another place apart from here, and we need to make this place better because that's the only place we have. If we have to align our line of thought with that, it means that everybody must see that my home is a place I should take care of. My home, my land, my identity is something I should preserve. That's what that part of the story is for me. The identity that, I'm not just saying I'm African, I am black by, okay, just projecting that with my names or by wearing African fabric. How do I see my environment, my Lagos, my Alagbado, where I say from the perspective of this is where I belong? Do I really? Yes. There are things that it's only the government that can do. But socialization starts from home. We need re-socialization of our people. We need re-socialization of our children, that when we are talking about identity, it goes beyond just saying I'm a Nigerian. There are things you need to do. There are things, places you have to preserve. There are knowledge about your place that you need to have to really show that you have that identity to be called an African or a Nigerian or whatever you associate yourself to be with.
Indeed.
Allow me still 1 minute into this.
So I don't forget this.
On this same event.
Okay.
On this same event. For me, because the father didn't just die, he was completely disappointed over the vote that took place. And he was shocked even more particularly by the author, who he didn't expect to vote along that direction.
Oh, the domestic vote?
Yes.
About whether to dispose of the farm or
yes.
not? Okay.
But the import of that is what capitalism that can no longer provide privileges, because it must now appropriate profit as much as possible is doing. Small farms are incapable of surviving, and that is why this whole question of handing land over to farmers, whether they are whites or black, will not improve agriculture. But here, the tragedy strikes. Don't forget, it is this farm that has fed everybody, taking everybody where. The father felt that. But it's even more, you know, the end part is that they end up having to bury the father in the same farmland, even when they felt that they are taking the right decision. The economy was such that we can't sustain this. Who is going to leave what they are doing to come back and manage?
That is one. Another thing that struck me was her, Ange Krog's depiction of how it was so easy at European airports to identify who was South African white in 1994. She said that it was easy to identify who was a white man coming from South Africa because when they came off the plane, they were the only ones always looking dejected with their shoulders down and their heads bowed. The only place, therefore, and I actually saw this in Africa itself, the only place where they felt at home by the time they had spent 300 years exporting things to Europe was South Africa itself. But the question is, on what terms? I think that is the question for redress for everybody, whether you are in authority or not. But I know that the audience has questions for us. And yes, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, panel. Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, the panel and the chief moderator. You've done pretty well. I'm curious about Krog, Anja Krog. Would you say her book was therapeutical for her in the sense of going to a couch? Because I get a sense of a mosaic. So much sensibilities, so much streams of consciousness. At the end of the day, I hope it's not a clever ruse to infiltrate into our, to get to the point where there is assimilation in our minds. We Africans, in quotes, real Africans. Because the real challenge with social experiments is that one day it becomes difficult to even know the past. There's so much revisionism going on. Look at North Africa today. You go to countries like Morocco, Mauritania, Egypt, Algeria, Tunisia. You rarely see us. But we once owned those lands. The Hannibals and co were Africans. Africans like you and I. But now what do we have? People much lighter than me, or my color maybe, you know? And the story has changed. They've now become Africans. But they murdered our ancestors. They raped our women. It was a forced miscegenation. It was not a natural cause of moving that the sun affected them. And
do you think that word is the word miscegenation?
Yes.
Don't you think it's a foul word?
No, it's not foul in as much as it describes a social reality, a social truth. And the truth was there was an out of Africa narrative. And over time, over epochs and millennia, you know, over time, a lot of people gradually changed to adapt to the environment the way. It was either a forced one or it was natural.
Okay. So the element of consent and...
Of course, you have today people, Africans marrying white people, you know, willingly, consensual adults, but you also had the situation where people were raped. I would want to mention a particular faith that came with force into Africa. At a particular time, our forefathers had to run into the bush because this force came propagating their faith, killing our ancestors. And today, we worship them. We worship what they represent. Anyway, I rest my case. My case is, let's be careful. That's all.
Let's be careful.
Okay, I knew that is the way it will go because he's an Africanist, just the same way this one is a communist. But my own question really is, I think it was, I don't know whether it was Agatola who was saying that, no, it was Funke who was saying something about she being struggling to not be seen as more African. But I don't know that is what I see of Anke Krog. You know, when she first came to Nigeria, the book she had written was about the truth and reconciliation, and it was Country of My Score. And this really is the way she examines things. I think that she tries as much comprehensively as to just try and see all sides. But what I'm trying to ask the panel is whether you guys see in the book something like, you know, not necessarily about not trying to be too African, but whether there's a sensitivity on the part of the author that we messed up, or look, I'm a member of the tribe that messed these people up more. You know, between the English and the Boers, the people that really enforced apartheid, you know, I mean, and that whether that is a thing that is coming through, you know, so that's one particular question. The second question is whether we should interrogate Dagatola's the wrap-up in his review, which is basically saying that if there's no there's no revolution yet, nothing will happen. You know, I mean, what do you guys think? Is there a route to redress in this book? And you know, Precious can answer that too for Kenyan.
I actually wanted
what should happen? You know, after investigating all this trauma, what is the way? Because we're looking for hope here. Essentially, that's the question. Thank you.
I am going to throw the question directly to Precious, because I think that Mukoma has some approach to that particular question. It happens in the novel that the one person who actually knew what really happened, what the skull that was preserved, what it meant, how it came about, was the white woman. And she...
Mrs. Shaw, right?
Mrs. Shaw. And she was the one who now gave custodianship to the black man in diaspora, who now returned it. But as it happens, in the way miseducation usually takes place, the people at home represented that skull as the skull of their own ancestor. It's a very perverted thing. By the way, I see an element of that in Ange Krog's account of what happened immediately after Mandela became president. Because he built his own house according to the architecture of the principal of the prison that, but I want Precious to answer that question for us. Do you think there is a way to redress?
Through the book?
Yes.
I would say maybe, well, could you rephrase the question so I...
Do you want to rephrase?
Yeah, it's more like, you know, is there a way, I mean, do we have a path forward? You know, I mean, like literature, African literature tends to be reviews and not necessarily how we get out of here. You know, I know that, I mean, in my earliest years in journalism, most of these novels will end up in coup happening, you know, that sort of thing. Now it doesn't happen like that. But so what exactly, what are the, you know,
are the way forward?
Okay, so I even in the novel, it is mentioned at some point that, you know, this thing is like a recurring cycle where, you know, something happens, there is an uprising, you know, then there's things either move to the left or to the right, but at some point it's still a reoccurrence, it's still a cycle. So you're saying, what if there is something we can do to stop this cycle and then to move, to make the movement forward, to take the movement forward in a way? In this book, I wouldn't say, you know, Bukoma addressed that point. At the end, there was still a reoccurrence, a cycle. But I think what we could do is, you know, call on the people that have experienced these situations firsthand and, you know, allow them to, okay, it's like this now. There are people that have experienced this war firsthand, and then they'll tell you, this is how this is what happened to us, this is the way things played out, and then this is what I can see as a solution to the future. Because you cannot keep having the same cycle of events play out. But if there are people who have experienced these situations firsthand, I think they have a better understanding of consequences and effects, and then what we can do to avoid what we experienced in the past. So, call on people that have, like Mukoma, call on him, you've had this experience before. What do you think is the way forward instead of repeating?
Okay,
the
I think Mukoma resolved that question for himself in a specific way, and I think we all know what happened. But I also think for the rest of us, the question of what is true, and this is not something that can be addressed by setting up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission one time, and you think that Nigeria tried that. I don't know one person who has read the proceedings. I don't know one person who has read the proceedings. I don't know whether we are interested as a country in implementing any of the
recommendations from it.
Which leads me back to what Funke said about re-socialization, which is an ongoing process. Do we really think we should allow an Ayikwe Ama to be a hermit in one island in Senegal, or should we, as we used to do in the 90s, constantly bring him here to talk to young people, to talk to professors about his latest findings? Do we think that should be our priority as a continent? Because, mind you, when they went on that poet caravan, guess who the architect of that whole process was? Another Afrikaner poet. Which is saying that these people are more interested in us than we are in ourselves. And that's it's simply not good enough. So I think that one way out is to look ourselves in the face and tell ourselves the blunt truth. Try. And to say we want to do better. So both authors, to me, underscore the centrality of truth and why we cannot afford gatekeepers, why we need intelligent interlocutors. The American poet, the woman who didn't want to publish. What's her name? The short poems. Yes. She wrote very short poems she didn't want to publish. She has one about truth. She says, tell the truth, but tell it slant, like the rain. Because, if the rain came down like this, things will spoil. No, I'm sure that before this panel ends, we'll find her name. No, it's not Morrison. It's a white woman. She didn't want to publish at all. Emily Dickinson. So Emily Dickinson says, like I said, hey, try. The women have a handle on these things that you don't have. And because we are really out of time, I would like to tell a personal story. So I was 17 going to university, and my father told my grandmother that this boy is going to Ife for university. The moment my grandmother heard Ife, she knew she had to do something. So she called me and said, do you know how victims of human sacrifice are selected? I said, no, I don't know. She said, sit down. So this is what happens. Stragglers, unlucky people are rounded up. That's why they say don't work at just any hour of the day. They're rounded up and tied in the courtyard of whoever is responsible for doing the selection. And very early, and very early in the morning, they make a young, nubile, naked lady walk in front of them, and they observed those men closely. Anyone who reacted naturally was selected for the sacrifice. Yes. So I was the best behaved boy in Ife. Anytime my roommates were saying, oh, regal, yeah, oh, ribosheri, I said to myself, these people don't know what they are talking about. But my point is that you need to have a room for truth. Because without truth, there won't be justice. Daga Tola, I know, but I don't want you to talk about class, or Daga. Talk to us, man to man, a Jegule person to.
You see, Mandela answered the same thing. Mandela answered the same thing that you are trying to force me, and the author failed in forcing Mandela to personalize it. That at the end of the day, you are back to class and status and society. What will happen to all of us? Nigeria is supposed to be a picture for South Africa. In another sense, too, South Africa is our picture. Because if South Africa is not failing because blacks are in power, that must be clear. It succeeded up to 1994 because there is 100 naira and 3 people can eat 100 naira. Now, the 100 naira, some 2 people who are now black people have been joined to manage the 100 naira for the same 100 people. The privileges have not been changed. This is fundamental in the story this lady pushes. It is fundamental because she exposes all of the ordinary people who are Boas too. Their lives have not changed. Nothing has happened to them. And it's not because of their skins.
Actually, you are right, because there's a story of a black man who was reputed to be the best farmer in the region. It was like he had 2 green thumbs. But when the general structure of the society changed, it affected him. Just
so
like
it is this truth that people keep hiding, that the problem is bad leaders. The problem is how the economy is being managed from one African country to another African country. We were entrapped into slavery, and that process has continued. The modernization of slavery into capitalism has not freed us, and it's the nightmare we have here. You now have a refinery in this country, and they tell you that it must be expensive than what you are importing. And policies are being put in place to ensure that that is what must happen. And that is the naked picture of private capital in the face of society or in the face of a continent that has huge, abundant resources, and that the hands of our black rulers are tied. And that is why she points out that at the end of the day, it is not about races. It is not about the color. Of course, he points out that can we own Africa? Every human being is an African to a certain extent, because wherever they came from, they first lived here, depending on where you want to categorize history. If we are stronger, all of the continents are properties of black Africans. You can no longer send these Boas away. You can no longer, some of them no longer see a home for themselves than where they currently live in South Africa. And quote and unquote, they want to be integrated. And when I use the word integrated, they want to have a society where they can also have access. A majority of them have agreed that these privileges can no longer, continue as it was during the apartheid year. Now that everything has been equalized, we now see that they are seeing the unequal nature of society. And ultimately, the truth that we should be telling ourselves is that we must organize. We must organize around the ideas that we can use our wealth to build our own refinery. I will not be a graduate if there was no Latif Jakonde in Lagos State. It is the naked truth. I'm paying for my daughter in Bangkok, and I have to borrow to do that. I can't do that for 2 children. I'm literate. I can't afford to send my own child to school. It's the naked truth. And this society won't develop if we do not begin to say that education, this country has its resources, and those privileged resources cannot be for a few.
Daga, I think
Thank you very
you
much.
made your
And
point.
that's the truth.
You made your point. I know lecturers, professors in private universities who cannot put their children in that same university.
How can they afford that?
So it means there's something fundamentally warped about the structure we run. I would love for this panel to continue beyond this time, but I know that I have already overshot the time by far. You have been a lovely audience. It was good to have you. Thank you very much for your time. We hope we will see you and the conversation continues.
Chair, sir. Uncle Frank, join us. Professor Alim, join us. Yeah. What's the title of the next? Yeah, well done. Yes. Good, good. To remember.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I do have a belief that you enjoyed the last session, and as part of the festival, of course, the festival continues today. Today is the semi-finals, and tomorrow is the grand finale, Sunday, the 17th. Panel comes up by 3:30, so in the meantime, I would like to enjoin you to kindly take a stroll around the beautiful park, most especially where you have the different exhibitors at the cell. So go there, buy books for yourself, for your wives, for your children, and for your world. So we'll convene here by 3:30. Thank you very much. See you in a bit. Thank you.